Hello and welcome. Today I want to kind of go over some historical kind of overview of what I've seen with Entropia over 20 years. And I'm kind of making this as I made a YouTube short about that I'm just I'm selling a land area, a virtual land area in my game or in Entropia Universe. And I made just kind of a post saying I'm selling it. I've got a couple people who are interested, so we'll see how that turns out. It's a big ticket item, so they can take months to sell sometimes. It takes people time to gather, be able to put their money deposited and all that. And there was a comment in there about, oh, no lies about taxes again. And it's an interesting thing because what I do is, what I do, I'll kind of explain the game. The game is Entropia Universe. It's a real cash economy game. It's basically for every dollar you put in, you get $10 of the in-game money. So the whole economy is based off of real money. So everything you do with those in-game dollars, whether you're buying loot or buying armor or buying ammo, there's decay costs for certain items. So you're going to be draining decay costs. You're going to be paying taxes places, and kind of where we're at on that is there's always been like a big misunderstanding on taxes, and I have kind of a historical context that not everybody has, and so it's fascinating to me how the game it's been going 20 years now, and it's just fascinating to me how the whole game is structured. It's really genius in so many ways, and a lot of people really, rightfully so, have some bad assumptions with it because there's an assumption in the game. Basically, you're at a disadvantage from the beginning. The whole design is basically it's up to you to figure it out. There's nobody going to help you. They're not going to tell you how the game works. So it's really interesting in that way. In that since the beginning, it's a community kind of effort to figure out what are we doing. And like in 2000, I think 3 is when it started. I started playing in 2006, so I'll kind of give an overview of my history, how I got involved, because it's rather interesting, just kind of I don't know, the overall path it's taken me. 2006, I was getting out of a medical bankruptcy, basically, where I was not functional. I was like in a wheelchair, not functional, couldn't speak, couldn't, all that stuff. And we did some experimental stuff. It cost a lot of money, but we got it to where I could get back and going. I lost like 90% memories, so there was a lot of things I had to do for rehab and things of that nature. And it was suggested that I do something mentally for the elasticity of the brain and things of that nature because there was so many gaps. It's kind of a surreal experience to go through. Because when you lose memories, it's not like it's an interesting thing because most of the things that you attach, at least for me, how it worked out was I remembered how I felt about things. I just don't remember the core details. And a lot of it has come back over the years. A lot of it has been recanted to me by other people. So a lot of it has kind of come back over the years. But in the very beginning there, it was only really like I couldn't put a face to a name, like even my kids, but I knew I loved them. Or somebody would say, "Oh yeah, you remember that guy in high school?" And I'd be like, "No, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I think I like that guy." So it's like a feeling of how I felt about objects or things, but there's no real context of memory, or there wasn't in the beginning. So it's an interesting kind of basis that I came out of. Is I'm kind of like a baby. But so the doctors are suggesting, well, maybe you should play some games. And a buddy of mine from high school, he was like, you've always been playing games, and just kind of like a history. I've been playing games all my life. Like every MMO I've maxed out. That most of them anyway. I've got like Lotro, EverQuest, Asheron's Call, Dark Age of Camelot, Shadow's Bane, like all of the different titles over the years. I did WoW. That WoW was the one I didn't really like. But I've been through a lot of them, multi-count. Eve Online, I have billions of ISK there because I was an early bookmark dude where I was selling bookmarks to 0 dudes. So I'm familiar with games, and the first game I did was Play by Mail, where it's just like a post-it note, like a stamp, send it in the mail and go off. And then it's like every 2 weeks you get a turn, and it was over. It was a cool game because it was like a World War II game, and you got 40 countries, but like Switzerland wasn't neutral. You get to pick your tech tree. So Switzerland could be a German tech tree in one game or a Russian tech tree in another game. And then Hungary would have, so you pick a country and you just kind of roll with it. You try to take over all of Europe with it was really, really neat how it was done. But it was my first experience with MMOs, and I was like preteen when I started doing this. And it was like a Rolling Thunders game. So I think it was like 87, something like that, 1987, 1988. But it was the first worldwide game where you're sending off, you get alliance requests from like a post-it from Sweden somewhere or from, Germany or something. And you get this like foreign pen pal mail of like, hey, I'm in the game. And, it's like barely, or a lot of them are really well written actually. But they'd say, I want to make an alliance. I'm hungry. You're Switzerland. Let's go get Germany. So it was a really neat exposure to start on world-based MMOs. So anyway, I've been doing it a long time. So in 2006, my buddy kind of brings it up that, hey man, you've been doing a lot of games. Maybe you should check this out. He brings this article and he's like, this dude bought an asteroid, a virtual asteroid. He mortgaged his house for like $120,000. And then he buys this virtual asteroid. And it's intriguing to me because on one hand, I've got the video game experience. On the other hand, ever since I was like a teenager, we've been flipping and doing commercial real estate, residential real estate. And then I kind of lost all that, but I was able to get back into it because of Entropia. And I'll kind of go into that a little bit more. So I've got a lot of real estate experience. So it was two topics of interest that really hit close. Games and real estate. Because the idea that this guy could like mortgage his house to buy this real estate that's like living in a video game where he's actually pulling out money as like, because he's got some kind of taxation system. And so that's kind of where we're at, the comment about taxes. And so just kind of my experience on it is that in 2006, it was a good community. The forums were really popular back then on all kinds of things. There was like a forum for every game. And there's a lot of interesting things about the forums. In the very beginning, I was kind of like, I couldn't afford anything because it was a medical issue that I had. And because of that, when I was not doing well, they filed a bankruptcy on my behalf. So it was like, it was kind of dumb because I only had like an $8,000 or something. But they filed a bankruptcy, and it was a 10-year bankruptcy. So when I start the game, I have no ability to get credit because with the 10-year bankruptcy, you just can't get a loan. You have no credit. You just can't do anything. So you're working on cash only. And at the time, I had no income. I've got 3 kids that I was fighting for in court, and that was like a 6-year battle trying to fight for my kids. So I have like no money. I'm kind of like borrowing from parents, There's a little bit that started coming from the medical side of things, but it really wasn't anything I could put a ton of money into. So I was really interested in it, but it was like, man, this looks like a game. You need money, But it still fascinated me. So I still started playing, and as I'm learning, because I don't have any money, my main thing is, if this is real cash, this is important. This is something I need to really if I really want to be serious about this, I need to start collecting data or doing something on that nature with it to kind of figure out what's going on. Because everybody's got a theory, but nobody's really able to kind of prove it. You know, it's such a complicated game that it's so hard to really nail down all the different variables because there's so many different cycles of things. There's so many different like sine wave type loot cycles between mobs and players and coordinates and timing, and there's just it's very very genius on how they did it. Really, it captures like the emotional aspect of people where there's a reward system. There's globals in the game, and it's like everything over $5. You'll get this global, and your avatar shoots up, and everybody sees your avatar name, and so there's that psychological aspect of it. It pulls people in, and it's really kind of genius in how it does it. But it also gives this negative view of it, rightfully so, because it's almost like a sense of gambling. It's almost like a sense of, and it definitely seems that way when you first start out because there is no rhyme or reason to what you're doing. And like I said, when you start out, they're not giving you any answers. We start at a disadvantage. It's our responsibility to kind of figure out where we're going wrong. And you can only really start doing that when you start doing spreadsheets. Like, where's my ammo decay going, and where's my armor decay going, and maybe this armor is not better than that armor. And, you can't really do it unless you actually look at the numbers and compare it over just long periods of time to really see what the difference between these different things are. So there's a data gathering aspect of it that becomes paramount to me. And in that, the forums are a key part of that because there's, the guys that have been playing all these years, they're telling us how it's gone. And it's a lot of helpful stuff. And there's other people who have really cool ideas. And there's math nerds in there. They're throwing in all kind of mining theories. And it's really kind of fascinating how people kind of justify what's going on or try to. And it's hard. It's admittedly, it's like the hardest game I think has ever been made for that reason. And so in the forums, there was this one guy who, and I don't know I don't know if it was real or not. But just as an example, it'll kind of go forward later into the skill part of the land area. And what I'm going to kind of go over is I own a land area, and since I'm selling the land area, I'm going to kind of explain why you want to own one, why it's beneficial, how it works so well, what the patents are behind it, some historical value of stuff that are behind this, the whole reasoning of why they would explain the tax system before, why they don't explain the tax system now. So I'm going to it's going to be a long form video because I've tried this already, and like the first one was an hour and a half, and I was like, that's pretty good, but it was kind of shitty on there's no visual stuff. And then I was like, okay, I'll do another one. And then I was like, I can improve that. And so now I've got this, these random images popping up for you. I've got my camera going so you can see it's all live, and and then I've got spreadsheets. So I'm going to show what my tax is. I'm going to show how it works to the best of my ability. I'm not MindArk. I don't know the actual formulas, but this is just me 20 years of just digging deeper than anybody else, I think. I'm fairly positive. Because what I did is I started building a website that is a database website so that I could start gathering all the information. First, I had spreadsheets, and then one of my spreadsheets died, got corrupted. And so I lost all that data, and I thought, there's got to be something else. And that's when I thought, maybe I'll learn programming at the same time. And so I started a Hello World PHP website, and then that was like kind of the whole... It was originally actually for my kids that I started the site. It was like a math problem site that I was trying to get my daughter really into math and programming, and so I was making little Java applet games for them where they could do the art, and it was a fun little projects that we did with each other initially on that, because they had to, I had split custody, so they have to go back to their moms, and their moms wasn't like a very good place for homework. So I was trying to make it like you can go online, you can go on the website, and you could do the math problems, and you could still kind of have like this regiment going if you want it, And she did use it for quite a while, so it was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot about, just a lot of how do you put math games and things like that, how do you put Java applets, and then you start the graphics and their sound and all that stuff. So it's neat. And then you start learning, okay, well, this is how data works. And then, there's databases you can start doing. And then it's like, okay, well, how do I send all this stuff to my servers? And so I built this C#. It's a log parser, basically. I think it was Tails or Tail something. But it was an open source log parser that I basically hacked. And I took it all apart. And the reason that the chat log in Entropia is rather complex because it's got so many different planets, so many different channels, so many different private messages. You've got your DPS running through, you've got your evades running through, you've got all the chats running through for the trade channels, you've got chats running through for the event channels, So there's a really heavily, it's a lot of data, and if you're not threading it, you can't really gather it. It's too complex of a chat log. So I borrowed this chat log that's got some heavy threading kind of built into it, and then I started parsing all of the data that I could out of the chat log so that I could determine who's selling what at what markups, and then it's going to keep a record of that, and then I could look it up, or I could have it, highlight when a certain markup is up when I'm looking for a certain item. And then there was, I was keeping track of all my blueprints. Kind of how I started the game was that I stumbled upon blueprints. Was that with the game, there's loot you can get on land, like off of mobs. There's mining that you can get materials out of the ground. And then there's crafters, and they use those materials together in order to make in the very beginning of the game, it was a lot of unlimited stuff, but then they came up with this limited item concept that everything is decayable. You need to buy it again. Your gun's gonna die, and you need to go buy another gun. And so, as a crafter, you're taking these items, and then you're making that item so that you can sell that gun at 120%, so that person, if they know what they're doing with their gun and they're hunting the right mob at the right time and doing all that stuff, or maybe they're doing an event or whatever the variables are for whatever they're doing, they're buying that gun at 120% knowing that they're somehow going to get it back because of whatever they're doing with the thing. Or maybe they don't know and they just buy it, which is a lot of people. But the idea is, as a crafter, you're saying, okay, I'm going to sell it to you for a little bit of profit. And then you buy it and use it and come back and buy it a little bit of profit. And so that's what I latched on to, because in all the other games I've got, I was good at crafting. So sourcing materials, things like that, it's kind of natural to me from other games. So what I saw in the path for that was that in crafting, there's this whole markup thing that you're able to use. So I started the game with buying one blueprint and then working that item, working the numbers before I bought it of like how much does it sell for, if I sold it here, and then if I also ran it to all the other planets, because there's multiple planets in this system. Each planet has a market, so then you can list things on each planet, and then anytime somebody's on that planet, they happen to need that, they go buy it off the auction, and then you can go run back and replace it. And so that's kind of what I do, or what I've been doing for 20 years is, make an item and then go off and sell it, in order to pay off the blueprint that I bought, because the blueprint costs money. And then once it's paid off, you start making profit on that to where you could go buy another blueprint. And then you keep doing that. And then I stumbled upon mining amps. And mining amps were heavily, because they're also a limited item. And like, for example, the level 13s I'm able to make now, they're $40 ped, or $40 item. It's a 400 ped item. Where it's a $34 item, and then it's a $40 sale. So it's like a $6 profit for every one you make. And then to use it, it takes like 20 seconds to kill it. So when people are really pushing mining, if they know what they're doing, they know where they're going, they know the markup is good, they're willing to pay that $6 markup to go take those amps and go either hope that they're going to hit a big one, which is a lot of people just kind of hope they're hitting a big one, or they know what they're doing and they're getting them, they're targeting their markup on whatever kind of ore or end matter there is out there. So there's whole strategies for mining. There's strategies for hunting on like what mobs to hit, what loot is selling when, and then crafting. Like currently, I have the largest blueprint collection in the game, and it's like 2,500 different unique items that you can make, like 5,000 blueprints with like duplicates. But because of that, the whole reason is because early on I figured out that with blueprints, you get to pick your markup. The more blueprints you have, the more variety you have on your markup. So you're really able to kind of like pick the pick of the litter because you're only limited to like 30 slots on your auction. So it's not like you're going to be able to like sell 2,400 different items. You kind of have to, okay, what can I get 200% for? I'm going to go with that rather than 104%. And then a lot of times there's items that'll drop down. You're selling it for 160% one week, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and they think, oh, I'm gonna take this. This is 160%, so I'm gonna take this market away and I'm gonna do it cheap. And there's strategies to that. I employ those. You can buy markets in that way. By kind of like making everybody run profit, but what I'm able to do is just say, oh, okay, you're going to play that game. I'm going to dump that product, let you drive that price down, whatever you want to do with it. I don't care because I can jump to this other product at 160% or 180% or whatever it is. So it gives you the flexibility to kind of avoid those traps to where if you have like one blueprint and that's your only bread and butter, you'll get people that will come in and ruin. And I've done it. I mean, the interesting thing about the game is like the early part of the game, there was a lot of Russian crafters. And even in Eve, there was a lot of Russian gamers that I have a huge amount of respect for because they're super organized, they're pretty ruthless, and they're very good at what they do. And it's a common theme on Russian gamers on a lot of the MMOs I've played between like EverQuest but like Eve was my first big one because I did those bookmarks and they owned like the 0-0 and like, there's some of those areas in 0-0 back then where they owned you. There's nothing. They kind of like picked their litter. So I kind of befriended them a little bit and said, I'll help you out, because you couldn't warp to 0, all this stuff. So I had to make bookmarks, and I'd spend like a week making a bookmark for every single point that you could be in every single solar system within that 0-0 space. So it would be like from this gate to this gate 0-0, and then from that gate to that gate 0-0, and from that gate to that gate 0-0, and then this gate to that gate 0-0. And so it was like a huge complicated, but it was employed to where it was like 0-0 was like lootable. So it was employed so that you could get through with all your stuff, and then people didn't have time to get you. And then they started warp to 0 and all that kind of went away. But it was really lucrative. And it was because these guys are so organized that they kind of own the PvP, And the same thing in Entropia, where the crafting guys at the time were a lot of Russian dudes that they're very organized. They have their own little networks, and they're very ruthless in the way that I've adopted it, admittedly, because it's effective. And basically, they'll come in and they'll ruin a whole market on the basis that eventually those people will crash, And I've done it sometimes on both ends where I'll come in and I'll overinflate the market on things that like I own. And then I've also gone in and like one guy tried to get me to manipulate prices to where it was like 50 ped markup, I think it was. And he's another guy with the blueprint, but he's like, hey, let's screw everybody. Let's do 90 ped. And if me and you are making it, we can screw everybody and nobody can do anything about it. And I kind of hate that kind of stuff. So that my reaction to that was, okay, I'll start selling it at like 0 so that you can't play your game. And so I've done it both ends. I've done it to where it really kind of kills their market. Like their whole idea is like, I'm going to make all kinds of profit. Well, I don't really care because I'm already making profit in other areas to where I can afford to like just dump it, just because there was, I don't know. There's little games like that you can play. And then like, market it, to own a market of a particular item. There's sometimes I would buy all the blueprints that I knew existed. in order to own the item. And then you could push it up a little bit, but I wasn't ruthless in the way that I'm more like Walmart. I'm not a top dollar guy. And there's a lot of people that make mistakes of like, I got to get the top dollar, the highest markup. And I'm more about volume. Volume is where you'll get it. Walmart, their original plan was like they were paying manufacturers like a penny over cost. And the reason a manufacturer does that is because they're selling 1 million. So, it's $100,000. So let's do it, So its volume really kicks out. If you're the lowest one with the highest volume, for one, there's so many different aspects of that that's beneficial. Is your QR ratings will go up faster. You'll loot more blueprints on the side. You'll get the extra bonuses like Hoffs and gems and random stuff in the volume that you do. And there's an aspect of that of the tax system as well that kind of plays into it. But so that's kind of the basis of where I started in 2006 was this crafting world. And then with that, because I got into the mining amps, you get familiar with these people who own the lands, like Never Die. So I ended up becoming friends with Never Die. Not that we're chatting like, hey, buddy, how's your wife or whatever. But, we ended up, because when I supply mining amps and people go spend those mining amps, he owns those taxes, and we'll go more kind of into taxes a little bit here in a minute. When he owns those taxes, everybody who spends a mining amp, so landowners love crafters for the fact that they're the ones that are crafting the goods to get people out there to mine the items or hunt the monsters in order to generate the tax that they get to take out of the game. And it's all based off of they bought the tax with the purchase of a deed. And so, and I've got kind of chat off just because there's a lot of things I want to hit with the historical parts of it, and I don't want to get distracted because it's I've already struggled with already kind of keeping on the base here. But so because of that, there's Never Die, and there's like Death of Fire was another guy, and we'll go into a little bit of history there that's really fascinating. Never Die is really fascinating character in itself. It's really fascinating story overall. It kind of surprises me that it hasn't gotten more coverage. Now I'll go probably more into that later. But because of that, there's a relationship between these landowners that I get. And there's also events that I start doing on the hunting side of things. And like the first event that I did was a 2007. You'll see a card that pops up. It's like a playing card of one of the events in 2007 where it was a Never Die event. But the event before that was like a 2006 Spring Hunting Challenge, or maybe it was a 2007 Spring Hunting Challenge. I think it was a 2007 because I couldn't fully compete in Never Dies because I was also doing this Spring Hunting Challenge. And what I learned in that, there's a player called Striker, and most people who play the game, they'll know who the Striker player is from back then. Because he kind of made he made waves in a way that he was like the first player to get to kill strike is a hidden skill that you get to unlock after so many skill points. And he was like the first player to get it within a year. And so he was just kind of like, everybody was pretty amazed, like, wow, look at this guy. He's kicking ass. He's always globaling. His name's always out there. He seems to be doing really well. And he's skilling like mad. And that was kind of another indication to me of like, okay, well, how is this working for him and not working for me? Because I started competing with him on that. And I started realizing that this really costs a lot because the crafting was doing so good at that time. The markups were like 125% for just like a level 4 or level 5 amp, which were OA 104 or EA 104, 103s and stuff like that. So it was a different naming structure back then, but they were really lucrative because I was selling, you list 30 amps in a page or of 2 pages, and I'd come back in an hour and they're sold. So it was crazy volumes. So I was doing really good on that front and able to just pile up cash, and then I was reinvesting into more blueprints, and then I wasn't taking a whole lot of money out. It was just all reinvestment of like, I'm going to build this up, So, where am I going with this? With the blueprints, Let's see, I'm already losing my thought here. But with the so with the landowners, there's a little bit of a relationship there, and then there's the events. And so the 2007 event I'm doing with Stryker, and I'm starting to like really push it. I'm like, I want to beat this guy, but I'm losing my ass. It's like insane amounts of loss on the hunting side. Crafting side is making up for it, but the hunting side is kicking my ass. And so I'm figuring, I'm like, this is real money. This is like, I got to figure this out. This is not. There's got to be a different way. He's able to do it. He seems to be doing it. I'm not doing it. Something's wrong. And that's when I really pushed hard on the. I'm going to start recording every little ped. Every peck is like a penny. A ped is like $1. So I was recording every peck of loss for every possible angle that I could start thinking of to try to figure out like where am I losing money the most, and and it's really that's really the only way that you can actually start making any kind of adjustments to say, oh shit, that armor I thought was good is actually really bad. And a kind of a sidebar on, there's a lot of stuff about wiki. Grokpedia is coming out now for this reason, and I saw it back in 2006. And it's interesting because there was a Wikipedia that was for the game. But what I saw from the game and when I started tracking my information on it is that a lot of times the people who are in control of the wiki are putting in numbers that are favorable for a sale. So it looks like a really good thing on the numbers. So everybody's like, oh yeah, did you see the numbers on that? It looks really good. I think I'm going to buy that. And when the items are like $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 for a weapon, there's going to be manipulation in there in different places, and you're never going to be able to really tell. You're just going to be frustrated as shit of like, why is it that this isn't working the way that the numbers should be working? Well, because this was wrong, and that's the big drive of like, I got to make my own website because it's not. I got to put this on my own website because if this is manipulated by other people and I can't trust it, I need to figure out a way to be able to trust it. How do I figure out what the numbers are, And then how do I be able to do my data based off of the right numbers, not some number I pull off the internet? And so I started doing that with the data collection. And I won that event. It was like 20,000 ped, something like that. It's just some historical thing. The Spring Hunting Challenge, there's a big BIG event system in the game that's been going for, I think it's still going. I don't know. I haven't been playing too much in the last couple of years just because I've got more involved with my CNC machine. It's kind of burned out. I've kind of feel I've reached all the pinnacles, so it's not as exciting to log in anymore. But I still play every day. I'm still making amps and making ped. I'm just not hunting. But I still log in almost every day, just out of habit for 20 years, and it's ped. So, but where was I going? Think about this. Okay, so the skills, or the blueprints that I start collecting, I'm able to start getting relationships with these landowners. And the history of the big is that the Spring Hunting Challenge was the original landowners that were part of this. It was a group of landowners who got together and said, let's do an event and we'll put a bunch of money out there. And it was like I say, it was a 20,000 ped of reward, which was $2,000 back then. And, that's big money to me. I didn't make out, it wasn't like profitable because I lost so much on the cycle because I was still a new player trying to figure it out. So it's not like it's not like I really won. It's more like I got a lot of my losses back. But it was a really wide opening eye opener of there's some stuff going on here that really I should be paying attention to. And so with that event, the big system kind of came out of that. It's all the original landowners. It was a Neo Maven. And I don't know how involved, allegedly some of them were part of Mindark. There were definitely some of them were Swedish. It's a Swedish game. So, I mean, I don't know if it's friends of friends or if they were Mind Arc or what the whole situation, but there's some kind of involvement to where, maybe it's because it was 2003 and it was a tighter knit communicate or a community when they first started that they had a better, but something. But they were kind of like the guys that ran the game back then. They ran the economy. They were the guys that knew where the loot was and fed all the little crafters and all this stuff. So they're kind of they knew how it all worked. And they're the ones that started Big like a year later, I think is when Big started. And then Big had it to where you could, if you're a landowner, you could join in and then you pay them so much a month. And then any global that people get, they get. It was a really cool system in that any of the lands that you go hunt, any global you get on those lands, you get on a leaderboard, and then you can get, the most globals in an event or the most total loot in events, and they'll do them over months sometimes. Sometimes they'll do them over a day or an hour. But it was really kind of a cool event system that got players really involved because there were worthy rewards for just playing the game that the landowners were putting up. And the whole basis of this is because as a landowner, you're getting taxes. And your whole point is that's your revenue. That's your, it's not the whole point. I'll go into more detail on why it's not the only thing that's valuable with a land area. But the premise of this is that with taxes, land areas on use, any mob you kill, if you have a tax rate set at like 5%, you're going to get 5% of whatever that person looted. It's not what they spent, it's what they loot. So if they get a big loot, you get 5% of their big loot. If they're really doing bad, you only get 5% of them doing bad, looting bad. So bad players aren't really good players to have on your lands because, for one, they're disgruntled. They don't know what they're doing already. They're losing money. And then the value of their tax generation is shit. So there's a lot of so there's different aspects of just basically, and then there's mining. You can do some mining on the tax on the land, and then if you whatever you mine up, you're going to get a tax. The mining tax is separate from the hunting tax. A lot of times it's set the same for people, but whatever you pull out of the ground, there's going to be a little bit of a tax that you get put into your tax account in the game as a landowner. And that's kind of the idea. And where this comment came from of like, where there are a lot of people think that there's a misunderstanding in that if taxes exist everywhere and you go to a land area and it shows a tax, because in the game it's a weird difference in that you have a radar in the game, and the radar is going to kind of, if you hover over the radar, it'll show you like who owns the land and then what the tax rate is if it's a private land. But if it's owned by the planet, so the ownership structure, and I guess maybe I'll go back. I'll just briefly go over this. So the ownership structure is basically there's planets. You can buy a planet, a couple $1 million, few $1 million. And then as the owner of a planet, you can divide that into land areas. And then you could sell those land areas to get some of your capital back out of those $1 million that you spent. Or you can keep the revenue and just keep getting the taxes that you're able to set at whatever rate. It's kind of like a benefit to own a big item like that, is that you have a privacy feature to where nobody gets to see what your taxes are. So on that radar, when you're on Planet Arcadia, it just says Planet Arcadia. Unless you're in the land area, and then it'll say the land area, and then like somebody owns it, and this is the tax. But when you're on Planet Arcadia, it just shows Planet Arcadia. It shows on Planet Calypso. There's no tax. So people assume, oh yeah, this is free. There's no tax. And it's not really the case because everything has a tax behind it. It's just one is hidden, one's not. So that's kind of the basic overview. So I'll go back to 2006 on the forums on two ports, because there's one important part of the thing in my data gathering where there's this disgruntled guy. He comes up and he says, I used to work for Mind Arc. They fired me. Here's what the loot algorithm is. And I don't know if it's true. I don't, have no idea. But it was interesting because it was a 14 variable algorithm. There's three of the variables are stamina as a modifier. And it popped out to me of like, wow, that's really interesting. Why is stamina? Because stamina is one skill in the game that you can't get regularly. in the game. It's only rewarded in certain instances. It's a very, very rare attribute to get. And then they started introducing missions where the biggest reward at the very end was one full stamina point. And that was your big reward for spending, a couple $1,000 killing this monster over weeks or months. And then you would get this one stamina point at the end. So I thought, why are they rewarding that? They're putting a value on it. It's definitely, they're putting a value to say this is a worthy reward for hard work. So putting those two together, I'm just basically from the forums, there's that I gathered. And the background in the very beginning, I started focusing on stamina. And I'll go into more of that I'll show you with my spreadsheet on my taxes how that applies. So there's that aspect of the forums where I learn about kind of this stamina clue. And then there's the other part of the forums where everybody's kind of involved. There's some hype, in the game because there's this, for example, the Deathifier guy that I got in the game with, he owns the asteroid. And he's running events like the event that I had where that card shows up, where I was, it's card decks. And there's a really interesting kind of sidebar is that without those card decks, I wouldn't have ever come back to the game because I had left the game. I completely cashed out in 2008 to go do real estate stuff because it's like the only money I had. So I completely cashed out everything. But there's a guy named Deathifier from Australia. And I think it's David Story or David something. There's a couple Davids in the game that got really they had a lot of press. And so he kind of got famous in his own regard in Australia because he owns this land area and he's making good money. It's back in those days. I mean, the events were crazy. I mean, like I said, with the mining amps, the way people were cycling money. I mean, it was just, there was a lot of money flying through that game. And as a landowner, like Treasure Island, he owned this big Treasure Island deal. And it was generating just a lot of money for him. For what he paid for it, it was a pretty good deal. And there's a sidebar of that. Like one of the longest gaming lawsuits in history ended up with that guy. And it's a rather kind of interesting, almost tragic history in a lot of ways, in that there was some argument over, they had somehow kind of gotten involved because he was kind of famous. So they had kind of somehow gotten involved with, hey, let's have you create creatures. And it was part of like Arcadia. Some of the land areas on Arcadia he was involved with of like, there's something about the intellectual property of who owned the mob and who owned the taxes of the mob. Like who owns the loot, like the downstream of the mob asset. And it was like a 7-year court case in the Philippines or something. But before all that, he got some press. And on the forums, there's a lot of kind of stuff that was going on about it. And one of the things that popped up was this podcast. And I've looked for it. And I think what has happened is because of that lawsuit, the podcast was basically ABC News in Australia, and we figured out it was ABC News in Australia. They did this kind of series on this guy, Deathifier. And the first couple were like, oh, this is cool, you're playing a game. And there's a couple, I guess I can go back. There's like one of these. So this is ABC News out of Australia here, and it's Kath Dwyer is the presenter, and it's 49 minutes, but it's abc.net.au, and there's this loot, real money, and virtual worlds, and it's August 2006. And so this is the only thing that I could find that was part of this kind of series that they were doing, where it was like this, it was like kind of like the .com, kind of like a .com mini boom of like virtual gaming, virtual worlds, what's going on, Second Life was also a big thing. And a really interesting sidebar is the whole reason that no other games really got into it until Meta was because there was a patent on it for 10 years and nobody could except for Second Life because they were kind of grandfathered in, but for 10 years nobody could. So that's a kind of an odd reason why a lot of people don't really understand the system is because they owned it. They couldn't, no other games could really do this model to make it make sense to the masses. So it's kind of like its own little segregated, patented little deal. And I'll show you the patents are like this. This is the patent here. So this is a patent for Entropia, or one of them. And this is invention relates to how the system works with services and buildings and things of that nature. And so, like I said, this is going to be kind of a long video because I'm jumping all over the place. I'm trying to capture like the historical things that I've found fascinating that nobody really else that I've run across that plays the game has gone into the much depth. I mean, I've run across like this, I think was suggested on a stream by somebody who happened to stumble. So there are people who go into depth of like how like what's going on behind the game more than just the game. So it's really interesting, but there's this patent here, and it's basically, it's showing the figures of how the method for virtual trading works. And it's this guy, Benny England, out of Zurich. And at the time in 2001, when he filed it, he was working for Mindark. And I don't remember where that, somebody had showed me that he was an employee of Mindark. And that's why this is 2003. And I think it was because it was there's a 15-year kind of safety. I think it's a 15-year safety, and that's why in 2018 Meta came out with Metaverse, because then they were able to, because of this patent. Because what this patent basically says is that we're capitalizing any claims for virtual trading in relation to a real cash economy. So it kind of locked it down in a lot of ways. And I'll kind of show you the basis of here on like 022. The financial system in the virtual world differs from that of the real world in various aspects: goods, services, and skills and abilities. So this is kind of like how they're justifying how does this work to where people are making stuff. So there's goods that you make, like, so it's crafting. So there's goods that you can make, and then you can sell them. And they even had it to where you could do like pictures, and you could put pictures in like frames, and you could sell those pictures as artwork in the game. And there's all kinds of weird ideas that they did based off of this kind of concept. And then there's services which are performed in return for financial consideration. So helping, so for example, like helping another player who needs your services for, you're a miner and you need to go mine, you're good at mining, you're going to go give him stuff. So they're explaining this is how you can make money. You can make it by making goods, you can make it by providing a service to people, and then there's skills and abilities which have been acquired in the physical world, from which it is possible to derive financial benefit, cannot be transformed immediately and without work or without financial equivalent to their equivalent in the real world. So that basically what they're saying is that your virtual skills are what they're basing your payment, but basing your value of time. So all the players are getting paid to play because you're getting skills, and the skills have a value of sale. So as long as you could sell those skills, you're actually making money playing a game that's technically free if you can provide services or goods. And so this is kind of like the principle of the game. And then there's trying to see where the one for tag, I don't want to look for it forever, but this is kind of like how they are which uses users of the system can utilize in an aforementioned created virtual internet-based data world, in that goods, buildings, companies, and devices which are constructed, purchased, and sold, exist only in electronic form, for example, in the form of a graphical file or a land deed or whatever it is. And and that service that are performed in return for financial consideration are also arranged to exist only in electronic form, such as helping a virtual figure which is controlled by another physical user, which is the taxes. So somebody owns, another player owns the land. Your your activities are going to give them a consideration of your time for using their land. Is basically what that's ultimately saying. So the patent is exists, and it's a rather fascinating thing because, like I said, they capitalized on it. Second Life was the only game that really was allowed to be grandfathered in because they started before that. And then there was one other game that tried to do it, and it was called Afterworld. And it was a Russian, it was like 4 Russian gamers from Entropia, and they're like, oh, this is cool, let's make it. They're going to copy it. So it was like a Chinese, copycat type of thing. But it was really an interesting, it was a good effort. I liked it. I played it for a while. It was all donation only, but it was cool to donate to those guys for their little effort. It was a cool kind of twist on, you had to like deliver new players through this PvE area. I mean, there was the mining system was kind of similar. There was hunting and stuff like that. It was a really neat, but they tried to do it, and they initially started out of like, hey, we're going to start deposit only, donation only, and then we'll move into the real cash. But they could never do it because there's a patent, and it never panned out. So they did donation only for a while, and it was really kind of amazing. I found it fascinating because one of the last years they did it, they came to the forums, because it was forums back then, and they started saying, we're not making as much money as we used to, and we're only making like $10,000 a month. And it was just this little sub game, like on like maybe 200 players, like such a small little genre, and these guys are making $10,000 a month off of it. And it just the donation part of it, just because people were still donating because they liked playing the game, and they were just playing it for the game and hoping one day everything would have value. And so they kind of dragged people on, but once people kind of caught on, it was never going to happen. It just kind of died out. But it was a really fascinating attempt, and also really fascinating to understand, because that was when I left the game. In 2008, I cashed out everything because of the housing market, and because of the crafting and all that stuff, I made out like with $25,000 because of the blueprints that I had. There were a lot of high-end crafters like Haktuma back then, and Buzz, and there was a guy like Chilix bought a bunch of my stuff. So they bought my skills and my blueprints to fill up their collections, and what I had was actually pretty impressive for the couple years that I had it. So I sold all that stuff, and I ended up, because the skills back then were like 14,000%, 20,000% on some of them. So it was really kind of crazy money on the skills and the blueprints. And that's an early thing that I learned, is that the skills have value. That's where I learned the biggest part of the game that most people never see, is that the skills do actually have a serious value. And back then it was a lot more than they're worth now, but they still have value. I've been selling skills for like 8 years straight since I came back the second time. But in 2008, I had left, came back, and where was I before this on the patent stuff? Oh, so trying to figure out where I'm going with this. Because I was talking about Death of Fire. See, I'm all over the place. Because I was talking about Death of Fire and how there's a podcast. And I went off a little bit on the patent here, but it's interesting because that's just how there's basis behind the game that most people never even looked up, And so, okay, so we're sorry for this sidebar on that. We're on the podcast that I ran across in 2007. And I think it's gone because we can't find it. I think it's gone because of that lawsuit with Deathfire, to where one of the lawyers said we can't have that out there. It's damaging to our case, or we need all the discovery, and therefore, take it off your system, or what? Something. I'm making the assumption that something happened with the legal case, and that they had to pull it off because it was specifically talking about kind of MindArk and how they were working with Deathfire and how this tax system worked. So that's the only thing I can think of. Because, like I said, we can find them. We can find some of the series back in 2006, but not all of it. And it's kind of interesting to go back on it. There's some interesting stuff that they do talk about in those. But the one that I caught was Bjorn, I think it was. It might have been Marco. I don't know the names to the faces as much, but it was a tall Nordic dude with white ponytail, blonde hair, ponytail. Maybe the Nordic whites run MindArk. He could have been a Nordic white. He's very, very Norwegian. Tall dude, lanky dude. But he was very good at presenting what the game is. And how he presented it clicked with me because of the real estate. In that he said, because they're asking him, like, why would Deathfire want to do this? Like, what's the motivation for you as a company to do this? Why would he want to buy it? What benefit does he get out of it? So they're, kind of going through. And at the time, to give you kind of a historical reason on why the tax system is so confusing, is because at the time, MindArk had this position that they were getting out of the tax game. They were no longer going to be the owner of Calypso. They were going to sell it to a company called SEE. And they were going to sell it for $6 million. And so it was a big deal. And, back then there was Planet Michael. Michael Jackson was doing it. Universal Studios was kind of doing it. But Never Die actually... I'm pretty sure what happened with that is that Never Die had taken over some of that contractual... to where he was like, okay, well, I'll lease Kong from Universal Studios because it's a Universal Studios thing, and you got to pay big money to use their assets. So there was some kind of licensing deal for Kong, and there was the Thing from the movie. There was a whole land area based off of the Thing, and you could hunt the Thing for forever. There's a really cool actual ad that he did, like a live ad where it's like him getting in a helicopter and running off to an Arctic land to go hunt the Thing. That nobody really saw, but it was Never Die did it. It was really, like I say, he's such a fascinating historical game character. It's surprising to me that more people don't do these deep dives on him because it's such an eclectic, really fascinating aspect of gaming history. Because he did these, he did a lot of PR where he was doing concerts, and the whole basis of his planet is a Rocktropia. And so he got like Motorhead, the rock band, to invest in the game. He got Kevin Rudolph as a rapper. He got him to invest. So they own the land areas on this same place that I own this land area that I'm selling. And so like Motorhead, the band, actually did do that. And it was kind of a genius thing because when you're buying a planet that's like $6 million, he kind of like pre-sold the idea in order to get it done, which is really genius in the ways that if you're going to break off your land areas later anyway to get your capital back to be able to pay off your loans or whatever it is, why don't you do it front loaded? So that's kind of what he did. Is he front loaded all the land sales, and if you look at the map of Rocktropia, it'll pop through on the little. You've seen it a couple times on the slideshow, but on the map of Rocktropia, you'll notice that a lot of it is green areas, and green areas are basically chunked off land areas that they're sold. So he's not getting revenue from those as much as if he owned it. So as the owner of the planet, there's like a little percentage he's going to get off of no matter what. And if a player starts there on the planet, for example, he'll get no matter what, some kind of small percentage of your cycle, no matter where you go. So there's a tax system on the lands that's the biggest one, but there's also like a tax system that attaches to you as a player based on where you started. So if you start on one planet, they'll get your cut. If you start on a different planet, they'll get your cut. And then so there's little bitty fractions that come out of if he sells land, he might still get a little fraction of that. And I don't know the exact details, but I'm pretty sure that they're probably like a, I think it's 0.08% was disclosed in the other asteroid, the Monria sale. As part of that, they had to disclose like what are you buying with this big asset, and it was somewhere in there that was 0.08% for the avatar payment that follows. Like if an avatar got created on Monria, which is why you wanted to buy the land on that one, it's not so much the taxes, but the idea was is if you could generate 1,000 players and you're getting 0.08% on everything they do, and they're spending $20,000 a year doing cycling stuff, then you add that up and you're making more money on the people no matter where they go. So it's not just on your land. They can go to Rocktropia and you're still making a little bit of chunk off of them. So that was really why you wanted to buy Monria, is because you had that opportunity to do that. The taxes are also really nice because you get to control the taxes. But the bigger pie on that one is the recurring revenue based per player, no matter where they go. So Never Die kind of has that kind of same setup. But you look at the map and it's mostly land areas. And so what most people saw in the game is that, I'll sidebar a little bit on Never Die in that he's the only reason I'm back into the game from the first place. Because of that, he ran those events on his asteroid that I got into the game to in the first place. And so there was his card decks. And so I bought 5 card decks at like $50 a piece, I think it was, because he lived on Hollywood Boulevard, so there's shipping between California and wherever it was, and he had to make sure he was covered for like shipping to Germany because it's mostly Americans or minorities. So it's kind of like a high shipping cost, but it's a novelty item, and it's a card deck. So I've even got it like right here. So that it's like a 52 card deck. All the different players are are in the deck. So you've got it's like a player deck, and it's a really really cool item. Really cool. One of the coolest things I've ever done in all of my gaming history ever. And it's cool to go back to it because there's a lot of players who don't play anymore. But it's such a neat thing. So I bought 5 of them, and then he shipped 2 for whatever reason. There was a mix-up, and so I ended up with 2. But I paid for 5. But in 2008, when I quit, I just kind of quit the game and left and didn't think anything of it. But the thing about Never Die is that, the event that he ran, a lot of people don't give him credit because he had the best. He ran some amazing events, and he generated a lot of hype, and he generated a lot of revenues for not only his own land but just for the game in general. Like crafters like me, because of those events, I'm selling amps because people want to compete in those events. There's so much that he did for the game that he gets he kind of got slighted by Mindark, I think, in a way that they could have avoided. They should have given him a lot more credit. He did, like I say, he was doing PR stuff at concerts. My old Soch leader from way back then, her and her husband like partied with him at some of these events. They were like mini TwitchCon kind of like, but he was promoting the game, doing on his own dime, kind of running around, trying to get the hype in America of, there is this game, and I am my avatar. He has, he even made like a Hollywood style advertisement, like a 30-second ad, like a real solid production ad, and most people never saw it. And then, he did music. He's a pretty good musician. And he tied in other musicians to bring in music to the game. So, and then, like, when he starts Rocktropia, he comes up with, he's a player more than he is, like, a big boss, And so he's more prone, he's always been focused on like what can be cool for the players. So like the whole cocktails for the mining. There's the different cocktails and the different jazz rock, blues rock. You know, it's a really kind of well thought out system. And the way that he designed the mobs there, people don't appreciate because the mobs are condensed at a density, and that the level that they are going to give you a loot table that's not found anywhere else. And because of the density, you're hunting at an efficiency that's really kind of giving you an edge that most people won't even pay attention to, because they won't even put it on a spreadsheet for one, and then they don't even pay attention to like what is the best use of my time while I'm doing all this stuff. You know, should I be chatting or just hunting? You know, and there's a lot of that where people just kind of like half-ass it here and half-ass it there, and there's a lot of parts of the game to where it actually requires you to be constantly in a cycle for it to be able to want to reward you. So there's a lot of kind of oddball behind the scenes sine wave kind of variable things. But so kind of Never Die needs more credit. I mean, he had some events that happened on his land that I don't think he could control as much. Maybe some bad decisions got made there. But there's a lot of people that always kind of thought of him as like a greedy guy. And the reason that I bring it up is because the whole reason I own land on Planet Rocktropia in the first place is because of my respect for him. And I'll explain it like this. I left the game in 2008, cashed out everything. I've got $25,000. I get into real estate flipping as the repair end of. I found an investor because I have bankruptcy, no credit. I found an investor to be able to do all the financing. So he was the bank. He could get the loan, and then I'll do the repair budget. So it's my money, and then I wasn't able to do it because of my medical stuff, but I was able to find people to do it. So I was able to delegate it out and say, hey, I knew you did this before. Can you give us a deal? And the idea is if I put in $25,000 and then you put your $25,000 down for the loan, and whatever comes out at the end, we'll split it. And if we did good, we'll do it again. And so we did it like 6-7 times over a couple years there. And it worked out really well. It was like a win-win-win situation where it was like I was able to hire some buddies that were out of work, and I was able to do something with my money. And then the guy who was, the money, who was just making money for having money. So it was a good kind of deal. But that's why I left the game, and I cashed everything out to get every single penny out that I could. Every skill that I could sell, every blueprint that I could sell. It was whatever I could get. I needed the most I could get. So I cashed it all out. 2 years later, because I'm busy kind of doing that. I wasn't playing the game at all. And it was just kind of a random thought of like, I wonder if that's still there. What are the odds? So I'll ask, who knows? And I log in and I have him on my friends list because of the crafting and the events and things like that. It's not like we're buddies, but he's still there on my friends list. So I chat him up and I'm like, hey, I know you probably don't remember, but there was these 3 card decks. And I just wanted to see if maybe, you had the PED, get a refund or, get those card decks or something, and he's like, oh yeah, no problem. I got your back. And that one move right there, because it was no questions asked. There was no hesitation. There was no, I don't know, man. Let me think about it. He just did it. And there was no ifs, ands, or buts. And I respect that a lot. There's a huge stand-up guy thing about that to me, to where that's a stand-up move, and I'm going to reward that however I can because I respect it, and respect, that's how you kind of give respect. So because of that move, like I chose, knowing what the tax system was because of this podcast that I already kind of pulled off to the side of, but because of knowing what the tax system is, yeah, I did sidebar off of the podcast, but it's interesting because I knew what the tax system was. I was more prone to go to his island, or his planet, on the low end mobs there, So I spent a lot of time cycling money, and he made hundreds of thousands of pet off of me from restarting from 5,000 skills. I've got like 800,000 skills now. I've sold 300 or 400,000 skills this time around. So I've already remade 1,000,000 skills. And most of that was on his land, just on that principle. So just kind of going back around it, he deserves more respect because he didn't have to do that. I respected it to the point to where I own land on his thing. I cycled a lot of my coming back up on his planet. I own land. I own a shop. I own an instance, and it's all out of respect because he didn't have to do that. And I thought nobody else really does that, and I should reward it. So that's my little sidebar on Never Die. He's a fascinating character. He's kind of a quirky dude, but deep down, there's nothing ever that I've ever had wrong with the guy. He's got nothing but good praise from me on everything from what he's come up with to try to come up with things for players to the events to the just being a stand-up guy and being able to pay you back without giving you shit. So, little sidebar on Never Die. So we're on the podcast and we're talking about how Death of Fire is going through, and Mindark's stance at this point is where we're at here, is that they're wanting to sell this planet because their idea and how he explains it in this podcast, and then I think it was Bjorn. I don't remember for sure though. I wish I could find it because it was so eye-opening to me and relevant on like real estate and how a lot of this works. But their idea was they were going to get out of we're not running events anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to make assets for all these different. So Planet Michael's going to come in and we're going to make Michael Jackson all this stuff. And then Universal Studios are going to come in and we're going to make Universal Studios all their stuff. We're going to be the warehouse of virtual assets. So we're the ones that'll design the asset. We'll throw it in the loot system. We'll make it all balanced. We're the platform. We're going to do all that. So that's the stance that they had at that point, because as you can see, they're already in talks to do this at some point. So they're talking about selling this land, and their idea is, okay, we're going to get out of this tax business, and then all these, whatever these planets do, we don't really care because they're going to come to us with all the content. We're going to make a little bit on management fee. We have the platform and the servers and things like that. But our big bread and butter is going to be, we're going to be making Firebird is an example. So like the Firebird that I have a spaceship. It's a warp ship in the game. And the market history is $5,000 or 50,000 ped. And so there's a really interesting example because I won one in an event that I did a couple of years, like 2015 or something. But I won one of these unlimited special edition warp ships. And I won it in an event because I had access to a special area in the game to where I could capitalize on this currency called Arcoin, that if you could stack up enough Arcoin, you could make a bid on this ship. And then, so everybody was competing for who could get the most Arcoin to make the biggest bid. And the instance that I had access to, and because I kind of know the loot system and the cycles and how everything's working in there, it's a tax-free, it's like there's some areas of the game, very few areas of the game, where it's actually like a tax-free, it's a tax-free thing. So some land areas might have a 0%. That's a true. If it shows 0%, that's like a true 0%. There's some instances that are kind of a rabbit hole to where they don't really generate, like my Bonzo's instance, for example. There's no tax on that loot. The tax is actually the key. So when you buy the blueprint, and then you make the key, which gives you access to the instance. So that's your tax is the markup in that case. So the instance itself is dead on tax-wise. You're not losing. Nobody's getting the tax. You're not losing the tax. I don't get the tax on my, it doesn't come back to me of like, you looted 1,000 ped of stuff in Bonzo, so here's 50 ped. It just doesn't happen because it's like a, so this other instance was like that. It was kind of like a tax-free zone that was kind of like just the way that it worked, the loot stacked in there much faster and higher than on the shared loot mobs that everybody else was on. And there was a guy, Junkman, who was my main competition, and I really appreciated his competition. I mean, a lot of people think he's an asshole, and he kind of was rude to some people, but whatever. It was great competition. He really pushed me, and it's like those Russian crafters. They really pushed me into being able to be good at it, you know. And I really appreciated it as hard as it was to compete against him. But one of the things is that he did is in the beginning of this thing, they started the bid for this ship for 50,000 ped. And he comes on the forums and he's like, nobody's going to do that. He's kind of being an asshole. You know, nobody's going to do that. You got to lower the rate. You know, do it to a $1 start bid. And then you'll see, you know, everybody's going to run that thing up. And so they took the bait and they caved. And they said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And so they started the bidding at like 0. And then, you know, as you get Arcoin, you're throwing your bids across and you're competing against other people and you're trying to pay attention to like who's got the globals, who's got the Arcoin. And he's kicking ass on the shared loot mobs because he doesn't have the access to the instance that I have. But he's kicking ass on the shared loot mobs because he's got the gears and the skill and the cycle to do it. So he's kicking ass on those, and he's gathering a sizable amount of Arcoin. And what I realized is that, and I don't remember what happened, but I ended up buying a big chunk of his Arcoin, enough of a chunk to where he was lower than me. So he couldn't outbid me. And he was really the only other competition I had. So I got it for 16,000. So they start the bid at 50,000. I get it for 16,000. So it's $1,600, right? When I win it and I go to the dev and I go to collect it, the dev was like, yeah, we really didn't make any money on this. And I was like, well, how do you mean? Which really they did because the tax generation, I mean, it could have been a lot better. They could have had more players involved. And in that aspect, it did kind of screw them over. But they did make a lot of taxes off of us. Even though a lot of those taxes were it's another example of kind of shooting themselves in the foot. Arcadia Underground is another taxed area that got deeded out. So now the players own the taxes. They added this big generation system, but the players are getting the taxes, not them. So it really kind of shot them in the foot on the tax generation side because the whole idea was kind of get the hype and get people coming to the planet. And then as people were there at the planet, they would be hunting on the side while they were there, waiting for a ship or whatever, and they would still be generating more revenue on the other parts of the planet. And so this Arcadia Underground area that most of these shared loot mobs were at is actually the taxes are going to players because it's deed. And I'll go more into the deed, how the deeds break out, but they're not getting taxes anymore. So it's not really profitable for them in the way that it should have been. It's not their instance, for example. Like the Gold Rush was their instance. That's where they're going to be able to make the money off of the Gold Rush instances. So those were good money for them because nobody else owned the instance. But like Arcadia Underground, when they run events under those, it's good that they're running events because they get more players onto the planet. But the taxes are going to the players. So it's not like they get like a management fee. But, so Arc Underground, so they're kind of shot in the foot on the taxes. And then when I go to claim it, I'm like, okay, cool. So I won the bid at 1,600. And he's like, yeah, we kind of lost money on this. 1 for the taxes, and then 2 for, I was like, well, why is that? And they were like, well, we paid Mindark 2,500. So they paid 25,000 ped for this from Mindark. And it kind of goes into, that's, at the time of this podcast, that's what Mindark's whole dream was. We're going to sell these items to the planet for 2,500, and then they can sell it for 5. And everybody's happy. And people are going to compete for these things. And people still buy them for 5,000, so it's not like it's not worth 5,000. But there is a value there. There's like benefits of having a warp ship and things like that. So there's value there, and people pay it. And people have paid it since. But the difference is that if they're paying Mindark $2,500 for the asset and hoping to make 2,500, but they only actually sold it for 1,600. They lost, the $900 or whatever. So that's kind of like the idea that MindArc had at this time of the podcast was that this is what we're going to do. All these planets are going to come to us and they're going to say, we need a monster on this land and make us a monster. And then you make a monster and you come up with loot, or you come up with a shop front, or you come up with a teleporter, or you come up with in any case, you're just warehousing your assets. You're just selling off assets to all these owners of planets or property. And they've done it throughout the game in various aspects, like the shops on Arcadia. You could pay to have an upgrade. But like that's kind of like the idea of MindArc at the time. It wasn't, hey, we're going to be part of the tax system. So he explains it as such, in that the way he kind of explains it is, what I know from like a commercial building, you buy a commercial building, you're able to like divvy it out however you want. You can have like a whole floor and rent that out. You can divvy it out into suites and rent it out. And he's kind of explaining that this is how the tax system works. So when somebody like Deathifier comes, the reason they want to buy it is because, or for example, like a planet, somebody buys a planet. The reason they want to make it a lander in the first place is because they paid $6 million in the case of this SE, right? So they pay $6 million. They want to get a return on that money. So there's either taxes or capital. So you can cash out your tax revenue for a chunk of land, and then you get with MindArc, and there's probably a fee to chunk it out, So they're making money on every little ad, every change, kind of stuff in the background. So, I'm losing my thing. So you buy a $6 million planet. You have the option to keep the whole planet like Tulan has done, where there's no land areas. There's no player-owned areas because they just want the revenue. They don't want to sell off the revenue. They just want to keep the revenue. And then there's places like Neverdie, like Rocktropia, where you could kind of see what happened over the years of he pre-sold everything, but there's not enough people on those chunks that aren't land areas to make him money for a dev. So that's my assumption of what went on with that. And then Arcadia also kind of had the same thing. They started chunking off a lot of their land areas, and then the Deathifier lawsuit was a huge chunk of land areas that kind of got in limbo for all those years. So there's like a lot of land areas on Arcadia that also kind of crippled their development income, because it's players that are getting the tax, not the planet anymore. They might get like the small percentage, but it's not like they're getting the 5%. And a lot of people like what that comment was is like, well, there's double taxation then. If you're charging so much percent and I pay so much percent on this, then you're getting like 10%, or I'm paying 10% on your land and you're just ripping me off. And kind of the whole basis of this podcast was that how it's actually structured is really kind of genius, in that everything is tax based. So like the whole planet is a tax base, and it's just a matter of division down through that tax base of who's getting the money. And to illustrate that and why they had reason to describe it so detailed then, and they don't now, is because this deal fell through. That $3 million, $6 million never happened. And so because of the whatever happened in the legal side of things, they had reserved a certain part of this planet and kind of probably already legally defined it, things of that nature, to where they kind of couldn't do anything with it. Or maybe they made the decision that, hey, we're going to sell this off as land deeds. So that's where the Calypso land deeds came out of, was this failed planet purchase, where MindArc was getting out of the game. They weren't going to be involved with taxes anymore. They're going to be happy no matter what. If you can make 10% on your land and you're running events and people are happy with it, go for it. They didn't really care at that point. And so this deal falls through, CLD comes out, and people are buying CLD for the revenue. and the revenue is really good. And then, but the interesting thing is that people don't put together that, like for example, when events come on, the CLD income spikes, and the events are run on these instances or on land areas that they kind of control, and they're tied to the game. So like anything in space is also tied to like Calypso land deed income. There's also like all of the non-player area. So half of the deeds of the sale goes to CLD, and it represents half of all of the income of the planet, where Mindark now owns the other half. So now they're back in the tax game. So they own half of the tax, and now they're relying on that for revenue, because the model of we're just going to provide oodles of content for people kind of fell apart, because now one of their partners fell through. The Michael Jackson deal fell through. He died, so that kind of went off the wayside. So there's a lot of things that kind of happened where it's like, oh shit, now we kind of got to rely on this tax revenue. So you've got 50% of the tax revenue is CLD and 50% is Mindark. And what that represents is like all the areas that they haven't sold to players. So all the Amethra land areas and all that stuff, they might make like a small percentage off that, but the majority of that has been sold. So there's no income off of that. But Calypso is such a massive area, and because of the way that they do their events, the ultimate deal is now they're competing with all the other land areas. So you've got land areas that are player owned that weren't supposed to be in competition with Mindark, but now they own half of the planet, and they have to rely on this income, and they have to come up with ways to, one, generate enough income for themselves, and two, generate enough income and events for the buyers of these new deeds. Because you don't want to like have a deed system and then have the deed just go off and crash. Like it'd be like a rug pull of Bitcoin or something. Nobody would buy into it ever again. So the idea is if we run half of it and they own the other half, as long as we're doing the management right, everybody's going to be making money, because we know how the tax system works. We control the tax. It's a hidden system. And when you do all the tracking, you'll find that it's not always like a 5% hidden tax. Sometimes it's 7%. Some planet partners will put it up even higher. And you can see it when they run, like sometimes before, you can kind of see patterns before they want to run big add-ons, like new armor sets or something like that, to where they're going to have to pay Mindark to generate these assets. And they're also going to have to kind of put aside some money in development on how are we going to distribute this and where are we going to put it in the loot. Do we have an event system? There's all kinds of things that those guys do to make sure that they can capitalize on their land and get people coming to their land. Because if you don't have like something like an armor set that's a rare set that your planet offers, people are going to stay on Calypso. There's no other, which is why like Cyrene has done so well, is because they've actually made it viable for people to go over there and actually get something unique and different and actually of value. Rocktropia is also similar in a way, but they're more skill based, and I'll go into that a little bit more on the taxes, which I'm going to pretty soon here on the land area. But like Rocktropia, the way they have the skill or the reward system was really well designed for the player. I mean, they got the best rewards. They've always had the best rewards. Even before Codex and still after Codex, they still have the best rewards in the game. And it's just another thing of, Never Die really kind of put that all together, and people don't even realize how nice it is to have that. I keep losing myself here a little bit. So I apologize, because I'm trying to get it all, kind of the context of where this is coming from. So Mindark is in this podcast, and they're explaining this loot system that, if you're a planet, you want to sell these lands to get capital back out. You also want to be able to do your assets, and you want to run events, and you want to keep people happy to keep them coming and keep revenue going. And then as a player, you want to buy these because normally you're paying taxes everywhere you go, but here's one opportunity that you never find in a game where you get to buy the tax system behind it to where now you get to play the game for free and actually make money kind of doing it. And like I showed the patent earlier, the skill aspect of it is a big interesting part about that land area that I've got, that most people don't even really think about the skill part of what the land area is. And that's like, I'm selling the land area for $15,000. It's basically the cost of what I paid for it back in 2020. But the skills that I've gotten out of it, I mean, not only have the taxes paid it off already, so the money I get back is just, it's my capital back, but I already paid it off with taxation. And then the bigger part of it is like $20,000, $30,000 of skills that I've gotten over the course of the owning it, because of the way that I'm capitalizing on. There's taxes, there's skills, and then there's loot control that you have in the land area. So there's 3 levers that you have to control, and then those levers can be kind of magnified with crafting, and I'll go that in a little bit. But so that's kind of how it's getting divided out. So that's the idea behind this podcast, is that they want to just do assets. They want everybody happy. If a planet, wants capital, they can pull capital out. If they want to just keep the revenue, they can keep the revenue. They can kind of do whatever they want. If a player wants to come to MindArk and ask for whatever, they can do that, and maybe get a teleporter. I think it's like they had a price list of different things you could add, like terminals on your thing for 10,000 ped, or 20,000 ped for a terminal, or maybe it's 60,000 ped, something. There were some really kind of expensive add-ons that you could get for your land areas. And that was kind of the idea, is we'll, if you buy a land area, we're going to do add-ons for people, and we're not going to do taxes. But it all fell through. Now they're part of the tax system. So they have half of it. Calypso land deed owners get half of it. Nobody's putting 2 and 2 together, that when the events are doing good, because they're managing it not only for their income, but to keep the landowners happy, that the income jumping up is because, wait a minute, we're all paying for it. Nobody's putting that together, that if we generate this revenue, then we're the ones that pay for it, and therefore the tax is there, even though it says no tax. Even though you go to land area, it shows a percentage, and then you go there and it shows nothing. But that revenue is still being generated. It's still being paid out in those deeds. And so that's the gist of what I got out of that podcast. And like I said, I wish I could find it, because it was so well stated on how it all kind of works in the background, and why people want to do it, and what's the motivation behind it, and why the tax system is so important in the way that it's set up. Because you're basically buying the tax and paying and pushing the tax down to the buyer. And it's really kind of a genius system from my standpoint, because I'm from real estate. So it's like, okay, so I've got an office building, I want to sell the first level, I can do that. And I can rent out the second level or whatever. And I could do it in a bunch of different things. Or I could, so there's different options you have as the owner anyway to control this taxation. So that's my basis and understanding of like where I came from back in 2008, whatever, on what taxes were. And then I come back into the game in 2010. And I ask Never Die, is there money, whatever I spend. So I'm coming back into the game, and I understand that the crafting system is kind of where the bread and butter's at, while I try to figure out some changes of the game, because it used to be a decay system, and then they changed it to where it was a different kind of way that they distribute skills and loot. And but there was a lot of data collection that started around 2010 is when my website went live. I think it was 2010 is also when I came back, but the website was like mostly for my kids at that point. And then I started doing, okay, I'll put it all in databases, and it was like 2012 or so, I think, that I really kind of started aggregating all my data into that logger to get sent to my website to get analyzed and just have this history. So it's been like a 13-year history that it's got now. So it's a huge data set at this point. And I really value it. Is like the whole project of doing the website with the software has been like, the educational experience alone has been worth it, just because there's some really cool solutions that I came up with between like mining and getting your coordinates to be put on a map on the website, between all of the getting all the DPS and evades and figuring out, it's just such a cool piece of software. I'm really so proud of it. There's so many thousands and thousands of hours spent on it, but so many like victories of like I solved that problem. So I highly recommend that if you do play the game, go into the deep dive on your spreadsheets because it's really fascinating once you start seeing it. Once you start seeing the patterns, it's beautiful, really. So 2010, I came back and I'm restarting, and 2012 is kind of when I got a condo on the short sale, and it was like $130,000 short sale, cash for keys kind of thing. They paid the guy to get out of there. It was an investor group. They didn't know what to do. I don't know what it was. It's the worst pictures you could take of a place. Looked like Sharon Noble apartment building, but then it was just they couldn't get in because the cash for keys guy wasn't paying for rent and he wasn't letting them in. He was being an asshole. And so they could never get in to see the property, but they could get some guy to get pictures apparently. So I don't even know, but it was an excellent deal because once I got in there, it was the wallpaper in one room was like bad. And then once you take the wallpaper off and painted it, it was all brand new. And then on top of that, because they were out of state and because I thought, well, why not? They seemed really desperate because they didn't have anybody biting on it. It's a short sale. For one, you have to have the cash. So that's one of the deals of a short sale is you have to have cash up front. There's no loan. You can't finance it. It has to be a cash deal. So I did the cash deal, and then when I get in there, it's or the contingencies that I had on it because it was it looked desperate. And so I said, okay, well, we'll replace the furnace and replace the electricity. And that's like everything. The only other critical thing is like the water heater. And I think I replaced that this year or 2 years ago. So that's like the only critical things that needed to be done. I got them to fix it, and it was like 103,000. I get in there, it's just shitty wallpaper. I paint it. I put some new appliances in there. I don't even redo the kitchen at that point. I think I redid the bathroom, and I put new windows in, and I did all that myself. And then I've been living off of that ever since. So in a roundabout way, it's 2006. I start the game. I have nothing. I'm bankrupt. I'm still in bankruptcy when I get the condo because it has to be a cash deal. I can't get a loan anyway. It's the only kind of deal I could do. So I've got the bankruptcy and I come back to the game, and then all of a sudden I've got this condo that really only exists because of the game, because of the $25,000 I took out in 2008. So if I didn't have that's the only money I had. And then flipping that, it was like 7 times, something like that. But it was like flipping a house, and it was like 25 turned to 40, and 40 turned to 60, and 60 turned to, so it was like little bits at a time. And then like 6 or 7 later, I had 140, I think it was 145 that I had at the time. And so it was like I had 15 for the whatever I might have had to do, just to give myself a cushion for it, and then I had the 130 just to pay it. And then that's been renting. I've had that for rented since 2012. So that's like the basis of my income. That's like I play the game, and then I have this income rental that supplies like any of the money that's come into the game has come from the renters. So it's really the game has been feeding the game the whole time. And any money that I've taken out since has gone into stocks, or like one of the pictures you'll see is like a lot of times I would buy Tesla stocks or, kids accounts. We started some stock accounts with some of the withdrawals back then. I bought computers with withdrawals. I bought new carpet sometimes with the condo. Sometimes I paid taxes with the condo. There's just a lot of stuff that added up that I was able to pay off with game money once it was all established, which took maybe 5 or 6 years to get my crafting back to where it kind of was, because the economy is kind of shitty compared to 2008. So the crafting path isn't as easy as it was, but it's still doable. I mean, I did it. I came back from 5,000 skills and redid it, even though people say, "Oh, the Ubers you'll never beat them," and I don't know. There's not many standing. So anyway, see where I'm at here. I've got over where Mindark is at on the taxes, kind of where I'm at in 2012. So with the tax system in mind, it was 2020 when I got this. But throughout the years, I've been doing events as a hunter pretty heavily. I've supplemented pretty good income with the hunting. And, there was a good serious amount of years where it was a really bad loss on hunting. And that was the whole data collection period of trying to figure out is it my armor? Is it my stuff? And it ultimately comes down to like, we start at the worst efficiency possible. And we have to get the best gear. We have to get the right gear to change that dynamic. And so once you have efficient gear, and once you kind of understand what the cycles are going and how long to hunt without catching, like if there's a sine wave, and you start your hunt at the very top of that wave, and then at the very end of that wave, you're kind of getting like two halves where you could be getting the whole chunk in the middle. So there's like timing, just a lot of different kind of things that you kind of learn over the period that get your efficiency up to where you're paying, 98% for your play. You're only paying 2% to play the game. And then that's with taxes. That's like a typical high-end setup, is that there's like a 2% standard loss. And if you don't own land, you're going out and you're losing 2%. But every time you lose 2%, somebody's making whatever their tax is on their land off of you. So if you looted 1,000 pet worth of stuff and they have their tax at 5%, they're still getting their 5%, even though you're showing 2% loss. So that's where the window is on why taxes work. And so Minark's got their plan kind of ruined, and now they're in the tax game. And it's not that they're being deliberately shady. It's just that there's no reason for them to go out and broadcast to everybody, go off and buy your land area and you'll compete with us. You'll be able to get away from paying us money. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to do it. They're not going to say, this is how the taxes work, and therefore you guys will now 100% see that you have a lever of this control. All you got to do is go buy a land area. And so it's not that they're not telling anybody. It's just that they're not disclosing it. Just like they're not disclosing how you gain skills. They're not disclosing how the decay system works. It's up to you. It's up to us. If we don't figure it out, we're screwing ourselves. And if we don't pay attention, we'll never figure it out. And the interesting thing is a lot of times the tax comments or other comments about how kind of the game works, or it's a scam, or it's just gambling or things like that. And it's like when you really look at the numbers of it, it's actually kind of a beautiful system that it's just, there's reasons behind it all, So I'll go into, I think we're at the point where I can start going into the actual taxes of land and how it works. Because I think I've given, I kind of gave the Death of Fire history. He's an interesting character. But it's a very interesting, like, legal drama thing. It's really amazing that like Death Fire and Never Die, they don't have these deep dives like some of these YouTube creator dudes like going and saying there's a dude that bought a land, or like because these guys are legends, like Octuma was the guy who was crafting all those years. Buzz Lightyear, he owned the other asteroid. These guys are legends, and it's like nobody really knows about it. It's gaming history that's so fascinating to me that no other players have even come close to in the world in the history of gaming. These are like pioneers in a way that nobody's recognized for 20 years. It's a fascinating world to me on how it all works, and the people involved, and the history of how it's evolved. There's the patents involved and things of that nature. So because of I'm doing all these events, I'm kind of starting to understand, like, you get a relationship with landowners because they like you, especially if you're a high cycling. If you're a high cycling, that's the best person you want on your land. You want a high efficiency, high cycler because for one, they're not losing money because they're a high efficiency cycle that's already doing good for them. For two, they're able to cycle a hell of a lot more tax than like 10 noobs with an Apollo would. Like 10 noobs in an Apollo, I can overdo in 1 hour, just me. So that's one thing about the taxes or the land area that it seems weird because, and I know it sounds weird because a lot of times like people say, well, why don't you have it on these maturity? Because I can't hunt the mobs that you're hunting. And I'll go into some details on this, but the land is for me. It's not for you because of this whole tax system thing. It's me taking advantage of the tax system. And it sounds rude, and it is kind of, but it's true because the tax system is built to where if you have a high efficiency system and you know what's going on, there's three aspects of the land area that are worth having. And so I guess I'll start before I kill this out. This is an event. There's a Lucky 7 event. And so a land area, you've got taxation that you get for all the activity of people come to your land, they spend money, you get the taxes off of that. There's also, you can run events to draw people in. You can give rewards for top players, things of that nature. So you bring people in and you bring a bunch of revenue that way, and then you don't have to hunt it for yourself. I choose to hunt it for myself because of the way that my system works, because of the way that the skill works, because of the way that I gain skills. And I mentioned the stamina thing, but that goes into how I use stamina and the skill system and the skill rewards, the repeatable reward on the land, to a massive benefit. It's like $20,000, $30,000 above and beyond what the land generated with skills. So that's why I was doing it. It wasn't because I'm generating taxes. And people think, oh, you're making all this money on taxes. No, it wasn't taxes. It's skills and loot. And the biggest part of how loot works, so there's three aspects. There's taxes, there's loot, and there's skill sales, skill generation while you're on a land. So everything you do, you're gaining skills. Everything you do, you're paying tax. Everything you do, you're targeting a mob. In hunting, you target a mob for the loot that you want. And when you own a land area, you own the control of the loot. And a lot of people totally miss this part of it and don't even really understand that it's actually a factor. So like a young maturity cool cat, which is the mob that's on my land, you'll get muscle oil and animal oil, which is like 101% markup stuff. It's like TT value junk, right? If you put it up to stalker level, you've got spleen oil, which is not 101%. Now it's like 107% or whatever it was. It varies all the time, but it's higher. And for example, how I utilize that aspect of a land area. Well, let me go. So there's that. And then there's events. So Lucky 7, aside from Never Die and his asteroid events, which were amazing events, drew a lot of people. People loved them. Awesome times, great, good times, Everybody's happy. There's rock and roll going on all the time in the background because he bought a radio license so that he can stream music for everybody. So it was an awesome little community thing that went on there for a couple of years. And then he sold that and he went into the planet business. But there's other players who have run lands that aren't Death of Fire and they aren't Never Die that have done insanely well. And one of them, the best one that I can think of, is this Songkra Valley on Arcadia. They did a Lucky 7 event. And it's not a Calypso land. So it's, anything that's off Calypso is going to be it's going to be trickier to run because your volume because you have to, the players have to be coming to that planet for a reason, whether there's events going on or more. You have to work harder to get people to come, basically. And so, like, this is an example of like how the events can be so lucrative. Is he had this many people coming to his lands like every day, and they're all trying to get this. Like, here's mine. Like, I had one. You know, it was based off of how many sevens are in your loot, and it was a really kind of genius system playing on the statistics of it. That, you know, the chances of you globaling for one is like, you know, if you're spending 100, or for me it's $200 an hour in ammo. I can expect 3 globals an hour. So like for my events and things like that, in the past there's things like decay that could push that rate up and push the amount of the globals up, and that's how you would win events that way. But there's a global rate that you could expect with a certain amount of cycle, and in that rate, in that number, because of that, there's like 3 an hour. It's spending $200 an hour. So you can kind of guess that, you know, with 3 numbers that pop up over an hour, the chances of a 7 being in that number, what are the odds of that? So the odds are really kind of in their favor. But if you get 3 sevens, if you get a 777 loot, you get a jackpot, you know? But the chances of you getting a 777 loot, when you look at all the statistics and the history of it all, it doesn't happen very often at all. So it's not going to happen. It'll happen, but it's just such a rare chance that you're playing the odds on your favor. And he made tons of money off this. Tons of money, like tens of thousands of dollars. I'm fairly positive, because of the caliber of people that he had coming. These were all the high players. I mean, there were some newer players and stuff like that. But I mean, some of these people were, well, like this is mine. I had 2,000 that I had got paid out there, but they're like Angel Shadows was in there. There's Mrs. Zap was in there doing stuff all the time. There's just like a lot of big names came and had fun doing this stuff. Flusk was in there. Chase was in there. You know, like Oz, of course. Oz did everything on Arcadia. He, like another legend, you know, like another legend nobody knows about or hears about. But if you followed that guy, it's impressive. It's impressive as fuck, really. So it's this whole world of players that if you do it right, you can pull them in, and they're spending, I'm $200 an hour. Some of these guys are more than $200 an hour. And so if you start doing the math on that, there's $200 an hour times 5%. You're making like $10, you know, for every time I come out there, for every hour. And there's players that you're making even more off of. And then there's all the lower players that you're really not making much off of. You know, it's just the law of averages. But they add up, you know. So there's the event system that's really fascinating, and I want to go over that because it can be done well. And the reason that I haven't done it, so I'll go to my spreadsheet now. Because the reason I haven't done it, and this is already 2 hours, but oh well. I hope people are enjoying it. I'm mostly doing it so I can record this, get it on the YouTube, kind of for history, in case people want to kind of see where I came from in the world and on these topics. So let me make sure we had patent, Sangre Valley. There's one thing I'll sidebar on this last page here. To give you an idea of what the scale of this economy is, it's a virtual economy, and this article was in 2021. And MindArc had put out the numbers for the media packets, or whatever it is, that they did $450 million in transactions in just the year 2020. So this is the scale of the game. You've got 5,000 players, assumably. And we've gone on to Steam since, and it's kind of sad. It doesn't look like Steam really did much, but it should. You know, it's a cool game. It should pick up more, you'd think. But I don't know. It's a different genre. I don't know. It's a different generation too. But so it's $450 million every year, and you've got like 5,000 players. So if you think about that, the per capita value of the game compared to like Switzerland It's better than Switzerland per capita value of population. So per player, each player is richer than like the person in Switzerland an economic like a window of a year GDP. So it's like, and then there's other small countries that they don't even make, they don't even have a GDP that's up like that. There's a couple smaller countries. So it's like a small country in the economy of the thing. It's really fascinating. That's a lot of money that's going around, and people don't even really understand that it exists. Really, it's like it's on a back burner of the internet. It's fascinating to me because like I've made this is all I've done for 20 years. I've got a Cybertruck. I've got a paid off house. I've got a condo that I've been living off of. That like my kids' colleges, cars, not all college, but some of their tuition. But the cars are paid for, the computer is paid for, so it's really enriched me in a lot of ways in like such a bizarre, it just sounds like it just sounds like it shouldn't happen. And it's unbelievable in so many ways, but that's kind of why I'm here to kind of show that there's a history. It actually does happen. There's patents behind it. There's actual serious money, like 450 million, there's $6 million planets, so there's this, like I say, it's fascinating to me. There's this value of virtual economy that's just been going for 20 years that, like I say, it's on the back burner of the internet. Most people don't even realize, but to me, it's fascinating because it's still going, And like I'm selling this land and people are interested. I've got a couple people that are interested. So, and then the next sidebar I'll go just because this lady has recently taken over, and she used to be the model back in 2016 or 2014 or whatever it was. But she used to be the model for Mindark, and she apparently has done really well. And I don't know the details, but there's kind of an interesting kind of historical thing is that this model for the original like PR of the game ended up buying this back in 2022 or something. But she's, I think, Ukrainian. It's another side history of like, here's this lady who's been doing like a modeling career, and she ended up buying. She ends up where now she owns like Mindark or like a good share of Mindark. So there's so many weird game history like milestones that nobody covers. Nobody covers this shit, but it's fascinating to me. And so that's that. So I'll end all that part of it, and we'll go to the spreadsheet. So this is my spreadsheet of my land area, and I stopped kind of recording it once it was all paid off, and once you figure it all out, you got to figure it out. But so I've got all the income of all the days that I ever did doing this stuff. And just to show and what I always set it at 4.20 taxes because 420. So I wasn't even at 5% taxes. So most of this was all paid off with 4% tax. And for example, like this is a day where at my cycle I can do $200 an hour. A full 10-hour day would be $20,000 cycled. And so when I do that on my land, it ends up being $1,000 or 1,000 ped in tax because it's based off of how much I loot. And because my efficiency is so high, I'm getting that top value. If your efficiency sucks and you're at 90% efficiency, it's going to look like you suck no matter what. And most people blame that on taxes, but when you're efficient, you get to see the taxes so much easier, in other words. Because the efficiency is so far up there, you can see the variance to where if you have a bad efficiency of like 90% general return, you're already 10% off. You're not going to see a 5% tax. But if you have an efficiency of 98% generally for whatever you do, which is about the best you can get, it's never really going to be 100% all the time. It'll happen when you're high efficiency. That'll happen fairly regularly, but not all the time. It's going to kind of average down to 98 or so generally, at least from what I've gathered, what my numbers show. So you've only got a 2% difference on efficiency. You can see a 5% tax a lot easier. So there's that other aspect that a lot of people reinforce their bias with the fact that when they run their numbers with a bad efficient system, the bad efficient system shows this must be a massive tax. These guys are charging me, and it's their fault. And it's just the way the numbers work that make it appear that way a lot of times. And so this would be like the best day I can do on my own cycle is like 1,000 ped. So it's $100 a day. If I really wanted to just cycle at 4% and do 10-hour days. I can't really do 10-hour days. I'm older. I tend to get tired playing this game for whatever reason. This game makes me fall asleep after like 2 hours. And I have this theory that it's like road hypnosis because the chat log is always scrolling. The damages are always scrolling when you hit mobs. So there's this scrolling factor of everything that's going in the game. And I think that's what's happening to me. Because like Battlefield I could play for 10 hours, never get tired. But the scrolling aspect of skills and chat, it really should be looked into because I think it's a real thing. It kind of puts me into a hypnosis, a sleep state just like truckers, because truckers on the side of the road, it's that constant line. It becomes a hypnosis and they drift off. And so it's like a real kind of psychological thing that a constant beat like that will kind of put you into a state. And I think that's what's going on. So I can't generally play more than 3 or 4 hours at a time. Sometimes I can do it, like some streams, like I probably would stream in this day. There's probably a 10-hour stream that day. But generally I have to take breaks because I don't know, I'm just older, and the way the game is, I swear there's a factor there. So that's my best day generally, is like if I do 10 hours. I'm not one of these guys that has an Autobot and just goes. I've never done that. I never would want to do that. I kind of have pride in what I do and what I've earned, to where, if there are accounts that do that, you could see them when you look at the global records on like Entropia Life. You'll see some guys are globaling at all hours of the day. They like never sleep. And so they're not human, and you can see those guys, and why Mind hasn't done anything over the years. Some of those guys have admitted, oh yeah, I pay people to play my account. Nothing's ever really been done about that. So there's some people that could really take advantage of this more. I just always played by the rules and only played the hours that I could play. So a lot of times it was like 4 hours, 5 hours, 2 hours. And then what it really became eventually was like 1 hour a day and 2 hours a day. But you can see I made regular events. Sometimes there's a player that might roll in there when I'm off doing other things. Now, when I had Mutation Station, I was working both. So I'd go fly over to Arcadia and I'd go work the taxes there to just kind of build the tax payment back, the capital back, and then work the rewards and kind of figure out what the loot system is, which we went over the events, but the loot system is the other aspect of the land that you control. So we're kind of go over to the tax revenues. And then the loot system is something that you control in the way that your maturity, the young versus stalker, is going to give you different oils, different markups. Tier 1 comps on the youngs, tier 6 comps on the stalkers. So that's a difference of 120% versus 800% markup. So you're controlling, it's another lever of your return that you can control when you own the land. You can control what the settings of the mob are, and then by the settings of the mob, that changes your loot window of what you're going to gain. It also changes, like when you're higher settings on fertilizer, it seems to have an effect on the ESI rate. So places that have more fertilizer generally give better ESI because they're fed. And fertilizer is kind of the way that it's a mined good that like a miner would go out and they make like energized, they get like this energized claim, and then you can take that and you can mix it with something else, and then you make fertilizer, and then they sell that fertilizer to a landowner like me. So it ties it into the economy to make it to where it's not just a wasted there's always going to be like a need for the owner to be able to maintain it and pay for that in some way to fuel the game economy in some way. And the fertilizer is the way they do that. And it's not much, but it can be if you have like all DNAs and you set them all high. It can be kind of high per day, but it's like my setup. All I need is an hour a day, and I've covered all the fertilizer and more. So it's like 1 hour a day would cover like 4 or 5 days of fertilizer. So that's kind of why I kept always going back and making sure I'm getting my fertilizer cost back out, because if I can hunt and get that return, I'm going to go, go do that. So I did it for both, and the mutation station I sold in 2003 or something, and that was mostly because Arcadia kind of the same kind of thing. They kind of shot themselves in the foot between the Death of Fire lawsuits and the other land areas. They didn't have the dev money. They were not really following through with their promises. So it was kind of one of those things of like, I'll just sell it, because they were doing a lot better. Like when that Lucky 7 event was going, it was really good development. And so it made it easier to run events like that. I'm not an event guy, so I never really ran them. I'm not that social. I wouldn't be good at it. I don't know what to pick, so I never really took advantage of that where you really could. The guy who owned the Arcadia land before me did really well with events where he was making like a few thousand pet a day just on some of the events that he ran on the weekends. And so, so there's a lot of back and forth between these two land areas of me generating tax, basically, because when I own it, I'm taking advantage of it the whole time. And so when I tell the people, this is for me, it's not for you really, that's what I mean. I'm using the tax system because, for one, I'm paying back the tax system. For two, I'm taking advantage of the loot, which on my account, I have all the blueprint. I have the largest blueprint collection, so I get the window of choosing whatever loot. With the spleen oil, I've got all the blueprints that can do spleen, and I can pick the best markup. Or I could pick the blueprint that uses spleen to get blueprint drops that have a high markup, or blueprint drops that have a high product, or so it's not always the product. In fact, a lot of times it's not actually the product of the blueprint that you're making money off of. It's the side things that the blueprint or the loot that you have is getting you. So there's taxes, there's loot control, and then if you're a crafter, like I said, you can take advantage of that by capitalizing on the things that's within your loot pool of the Cool Cat mob, for example. And then there's the event system. So there's a 3-part system of the ownership on why you would want to own it. And that's ultimately where we're getting at is, the task system does exist, and it's the crazy part about it is most people think, well, the tax system is the only way to get it, only reason to own it. And it's just, it's not even really the only reason to own it. And I'll go through it here on, so I'll go into the skill rewards. So this is a repeatable mission that you have a choice of bioregen, evade, or melee combat. And every skill in the game has a value. If you chip it out and a player they want to open up a weapon, they need to get skills to be able to open up that weapon, and they'll buy your skills to get a shortcut to that. Or they're looking to unlock a skill, or they're looking for better efficiency. There's all kinds of reasons to buy skills. And then when you're selling skills, there's a value there. And then like this is a repeatable mission that is 82 ped of the 3 skills. And at the peak, it was like 3,900 ped that you could get for doing this mission. And it's a repeatable mission. And so if I'm at 2,000 ped or $200 an hour in ammo, it takes me 21 hours to finish the mission. So it puts me at like 42,000 ped in ammo total for the mission. So it's $4,200 in ammo. At the highest point, it was like $3,900 that you could get just on the skill reward. Just if you chip that back out and sold it. So you're getting your money back, and the skills kind of right off your ammo spent in a weird way. And so there's the skills that you're gaining on top of on top of all that, and I only sell skills at once I reach 10,000 points because of the way that there's a skill curve. And everybody kind of knows that, like, there's the other aspect of the game is the curves are crazy. And I'll start with this example here. So I've got all these examples of me claiming this repeatable mission. And I'm kind of going to go into a little bit like how stamina plays into it and why that was important. Let me find it here. I know he's here somewhere. There he is. Okay, so Taz is another player, and he's a cool guy. I really like him. But he kind of like started the game, and he kind of like came onto it like really hardcore, and had really good efficient system that he bought into. But he kind of didn't have a whole lot of skills. And so, for example, of 82 ped reward for him with melee combat at basically 0, which is 260 points. He got 4,000 points for that, and he got 7 hit points from just one mission, from claiming the one mission reward. He gets all this stuff out of it. 4,000 points, 6 hit points, which is a pretty big deal for a new player for one mission. It's huge. But to illustrate how bad that curve is, on my evade, so like I only sell skills that are once at 10,000 points and over because of this curve. Because at 10,000 points, the same mission for 82 ped gets me 91 points. So 41 or 4,000 points versus 91 points, that's the skill curve. It's massive. So it's just a drastic difference. And then from 100 or from 10K to like 20K, it really kind of drops off from there. You're not really seeing much difference. You're not going to see like a drastic jump between 0 and, Prof 100. So it's kind of like the range of the game is 0 to 100. And then anything above and beyond is kind of like unlocking new things, but it's like excess in a lot of ways. There's small efficiency gains, but their diminishing returns becomes a thing. So you can see that for the same reward, I only get 90 points. He gets 44,000 points. So that's the difference of the value of the skills. But what I started doing is I started recording just kind of like, because it was such a good mission and I could do it every 20 hours, it's really impressive how fast these professions moved up. So like I was like 75 biotropic, I think, when I started the biotropic part of it, and then I was 100 within like a year, like 6 months or something. And then, but just by doing this mission over and over and over and over, because you're getting bioregen while you're using the skill. So there's the skills that you generate on the mission reward, and then you're also generating skills within your playtime. And the stamina plays into that as well, which is also why the skills are the biggest part of land. So, at least how I've played it. So, for an example here, we'll go to where I started keeping track of stamina, because there's something that you start to notice. Like I said before, they originally started with this whole thing that loot algorithm that whether that was just some guy or whether it was an actual employee. There's 3 things of stamina in that algorithm. Makes me wonder why is stamina in there? Why is it not agility? Why is it not all these other things? And I think strength was in there once and agility, but it was like stamina was heavy. And then they start putting the rewards, and stamina is like your best reward, and you won't get it in gameplay unless we reward it to you. So there's a heavy value. And then I start noticing that this number actually changes. So this 81 to 116 is changing in ways that it's not supposed to. I'm not supposed to get more skills after I'm higher level, because the skill curve determines that the higher level you are, the lower amount of skills you get. I get 92 at 15,000 points or whatever it is, or 10,000 points, and then that guy gets 4,000 points at 0 points. So that's the assumption, is that every time you go up in skill, you're going to get less back for it. But the interesting thing, and it applies to the gameplay too, because when I start doing when you start doing when you actually start recording this stuff, it's, here's an example. At this point, I've got 9992 points. So I'm just under 10K. So this is like me just getting up there, and I'm at 85.98 on my Evader Prof when I start this. And then at the end of it, before I claim it. So this is like what it looked like right before I said accept the mission, claim, and then what it looks like after I accept the chunk of mission. So it's the 82 ped or whatever that comes out. So I'm 85.98 right before it. I come out, I'm 86.15. So I gained like 0.17 of a level, right? And then it was 67 points that I gained on evade. So, okay, I'm at 116 stamina at that point. But then, like, when I'm recording it, I think what I was doing is Cyrene, where they did those rhino mobs. They had a repeatable mission on that one. And so I had gone and said, okay, I'm going to go do this repeatable mission, and then I'm going to get some stamina, and I'll come back, and I'll get some stamina, and I'll come back, and I'll try this and see what happens. And so it's interesting because I can't quite figure it out, but it's really interesting how this pans out. And so I had 67 points and I left that mission at 86.15. So I come back with 2 stamina. I went off and did stuff, and I gained some evader from doing missions or whatever, because I'm evading while I'm doing those. You know, I have to kill like 10,000 of the rhinos to get the stamina, to get all the staminas. And so it takes a long time. And so I had gained between 86.15 and 86.52. So I'd gained like 0.43 or whatever that is, of a level, of a professional level in between the mission, between claiming the mission. So you'd think I'm higher level, I'm that much higher of a professional level. And then I claim it and it's 93 points. Well, how does that work? I'm supposed to have less points. I had 63, I had 67. Now I'm at 93. I got more points, and the only thing that's different is the same amount of ped. The ped value doesn't change. It's 82 ped every time you do it. The only thing that changed was I had 2 stamina. So you start to see that stamina is actually affecting skill gain, skill rate. And from the patent, we could see that skills are like one of the primary methods of paying you. So this is why it's this, and from cashing out in 2008, I really kind of got an idea of like why skills really do have a value, and that most people think, well, I'll never cash out my skills, or it'll never be worth value. But until you do it, you won't really realize just how much value is sitting there. Because it ends up being a lot. But the other odd thing, so I did that, and then I come back and I add 1 more stamina, and I'm like, okay, so it should drop again because I'm at like 86.59 now. Or I guess this is where I start selling the skill, because I ended that mission at 86.75, but I got over 10,000 points. So at this point, I could take a 12 ped chip and I could chip it out and I could sell 12 points. And then when Taz comes along and he does that, he'll get like 1,500 points as a new player. So my 12 points turns into 1,500 points for a new player. If it was like I cashed out the whole reward, then I would say, I think I don't even know what it would be for the reward at 10K. I think it would probably be around like 60 points, something like that. Maybe 70 or 80 points. But so there's points that would be taken out for the full mission, but it's not nearly like the 4,000 points that he would get by chipping that chip in. So there's a difference but it's not matching up, because now I've got 90. I went from 67 and I gained profession. I went to 93, and I started this one at a little lower profession, but ultimately it was higher than the profession I started before, because this one I was at 86.5 through 5.2 when I claimed it, and I jumped up. And then this one is 86.59. So it was a little higher than the other one, but it still jumped up more because it was 93 and then 94 or 97. And then I did it again.
and I had 120 stam that time, and now I'm at 115 experience for the same 82 ped reward. So here's the other aspect of the land areas that I've never really seen anybody, because I don't think anybody pays attention to it, for one, and nobody seems to understand this is going on. So I'm gaining more skills as I go along, and the only thing that changes is stamina. The other thing that I've noticed along the way is that with my stamina, my skill gain on the playtime is jumping up. So I'm getting more skills per hour than pretty much everybody else based off of the stamina. But there's also a difference of, if I chip this out and I say I want to take out 115 points because that's what it told me it was, and that's my 82 ped chip. When I chip it out, it tells me to select the skill points. It doesn't tell me to select the percentage of my skill. So when I say I want to take out 115 points, it's a different value when you chip it out than it is on a 97 point chip. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a difference of value based off of the stamina to where the chip is actually a different value entirely. It's not just the markup. Because for 82 ped chip, if it's giving me 97 one time and 115 the next time, there's some kind of variance going on there. And I don't know if it's given me, like, maybe there's a window of, like, this is your reward window of, like, this will vary a little bit, but it doesn't make sense because they're telling us that all of our rewards, like Codex, is a set amount. But it's not always a set amount because your stamina changes it. So there's an aspect of the stamina changing the skill system that changes your skill rate, that changes the profit that you get because of the skills having value. And it's a long kind of way going around why the taxes, a lot of people, they still say, oh, you lie about the taxes, like how you can make it. And it's like, the taxes are paying for just paying it back. They aren't even really fueling play, because it's a separate system, So it's like me playing, and I'll go into this a little bit more of, like, here's another player, just an example that it can't be double taxed. You know what I'm saying? Because, like, here's Hobbler. He's a really good player, top end player, super high efficient system. He runs at like $250 an hour, $300 an hour, something like that. He's higher than me. So he's super efficient, cycles a ton of money per hour. Perfect person that you want on your land. You don't want the people that don't know what they're doing because they just complain that you're stealing. He's showing a total cycle of 80,000 for the mission that he was doing. I think he did 2 cycles of mission. So he spent 80,000 ped. He got 81,000 back. He's paying me taxes the whole time. So he paid me 4% the whole time of that 80,000 ped of his TT return. 81,000 times 4% is what I got in taxes. He still had 101% return. So that's where the efficiency game really comes into the taxes, to where you can't see it unless you're at that level of play. You're never going to see that I'm near 100% or over 100% on a cycle, because if you're not efficient, your gap is already going to be so low that you're going to just assume it's all taxes, they're screwing me. And it's just not what it is. And so, like, that's an example of just him telling me, hey man, I did really good on this land, and I love that. He made a profit. Plus, I made a profit because he hoffed a few times. I got taxes off those hoffs. I got taxes off the whole 81,000. I got 4% off of that. So I'm happy. He's happy. Everybody's happy. It's a brilliant, brilliant system. And it's a shame that a lot of people will assume that the taxes are out to screw you or rip you off. And the only difference is, when I own the tax here, it's shown on the radar. When Mindark owns the tax on Calypso, it's not shown on the radar. But the CLD is getting paid in the background for the activity done on the lands. I'm getting paid in the background for the activity done on the lands. It's like it's one and the same. Kind of, it's the only difference is who controls it and how much they're actually charging. So the taxes are awesome. It's cool. It's an awesome concept that you can buy this piece of land within a video game And anybody who comes and plays on your land, you get money for it because it's all based on real money. They deposit money into the game. You're getting a portion of their deposit in a way. And then it kind of steamrolls. And hopefully they loot good stuff and they're making 101%. And they can go off and loot other things and make other things, whatever it is that they're doing, however they do their thing, they can do it. And yeah, so it's a beautiful system, but the kickback I've always gotten on this tax system is that, the taxes are, you're a landowner. Your only purpose to tell us about this tax system is because you want to generate taxes. And it's like, I never even owned the tax land for that purpose in the first place. It was all for me, not for you. If I went into that, then sure. That's why I would say, like, oh yeah, this is how the taxes come on my land. But you don't see me doing that. I'm not promoting my land. I never have. I kind of did when I was doing the events early on and kind of playing with that, but it comes to a point to where it's like, I'm not advertising my land when I get so much benefit out of it because I paid off the land with taxes just on the generation. I'll get the money back on the sale of the taxes. So I've doubled my money. Then I've got $20,000 to $30,000 of skills that I've accumulated over the turn. And a lot of those I've sold. They've turned into Tesla stock. They've turned into other things. So I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, it's a brilliant system. And it's just a shame to me that so many people have kickback, that it must be a scam. There must be, because you're set at such a disadvantage as a player, it's going to look like that no matter what you do. It's going to look like everything's against you because it is. It's against you. It's not going to work for Mindark if they just give it to everybody. So I hope this kind of goes over some of the biggest reasons of why, for one, there's a land area, why I would want to own it, what actually I'm doing with it, and that it actually does generate, all these taxes. It's not a lie. It actually does exist. The system is actually brilliant, and I wish more people paid attention to it because like I say, it's a brilliant system. I wish I came up with it. It's one of those things where it's like, man, this is so deep when you really, it's got patents behind it. It's just such a beautiful game in so many ways. And I love the game. I always love the game. I've been critical of Mindark in the past, but, and I don't, players can be critical, I think. I think we have a right to be critical at times, but I don't hate Mindark. I don't think they're a bad company. I don't think they're out trying to screw anybody by not disclosing what the reality of the taxes are, because there's justification for not doing that. They don't want, they can't ruin the tax. They can't ruin the return that the CLD's owners are getting, because that's the one deed of the game that kind of defines their success. So if they fuck that deed up, everybody's just going to be like, well, look, their biggest deed is like you lose money. Why would you even buy it? So it's always got to work. So they're always going to focus on CLD content, Calypso content, their revenues. And it's not even really, I don't think, as much for their revenues as much as they know that this CLD platform is so important on the, is so important for looks, in a way, of maintaining that the stability is there. In other words, it's been paying out. It's like realty income. It's a dividend stock. It pays out every month. It's always raised its income. It's always been there. It's consistent. People love it. And that's what CLD is it gives people, the investors, the confidence that the system is still working, that the system is still paying, that there's still volume behind the game. So they can't really screw it up. They can't, and by screwing that up, they would go off and tell everybody, oh yeah, just go buy your own tax, and then you don't have to come here anymore. It doesn't work for them, so they're not going to do it. And so, unfortunately, it's people like me that have to kind of like beat my head against the wall, trying to get people to like listen to the other side of the wall, like the echo of like, here I am on this side of the window, and this is what I'm seeing on the taxes, and what they're saying is, it's there, it's real. I see it. I've been enriched by it, It's rather complex. There's more depth to it than people even really look into. Most landowners don't even know about the loot. Like some landowners I've talked to, they don't even know that they can control the loot on their mob. And to me, that's a huge thing because as a crafter or as a hunter who's targeting, that's your job. You're targeting loot to make sure your return is always good. So it's mind blowing to me that they don't even understand like that's a core aspect of the game, that you have a lever of markup, and then the skills are a lever of markup that we're being paid by our time according to the patent of the game. So it's a fascinating game. It's a fascinating history. I'll always forget, like I say, I'll always love it. It's interesting to me how it's kind of gone in the shadows all these years. It's a $450 million annual economy, and most people don't know about it, or if they know about it, they think it's a scam. At $450 million a year for 20 years, it's like Bitcoin, like how many crypto scams, rug pulls, and shit like that have been pulled since, and this is still going strong. Like nothing happened, and nobody knows about it, and they're still like. I mean, that's another aspect that's kind of weird. It's because like there's this whole virtual asset thing that's like based on real money, and then crypto has come out in the middle of all this. So crypto came out, like after this was well established, and it's always been really interesting to me to where like people put their, which is kind of why I have a little different perspective of it, because I'm actually seeing like these are real values that I can tangibly see, identify, I can match with, I can see a number. I could see that there's value behind it. I could see that there's demand behind it. People want to buy stuff. People want to sell stuff. With crypto, you can't really see that. There's no metric to show you like how popular is it? Like how are people actually using it? It's just we're buying it, we're going to hope, So it's another asset, sure. It's a virtual asset, and it's hypocritical for me to be kind of critical of crypto when it's a virtual asset and I'm doing virtual assets, So it's just a bizarre thing because it's so different. And crypto could be so much better in a lot of ways because like if they use the blockchain for things like this, to where it's a value thing, to where people see that there's demand and value and economic benefit behind it, it would be a lot bigger than it is. But because people can't see that, it's just a speculation thing. And then other people only see a speculation. So, I don't know. Hopefully that covers it. I think I covered most of it. I got all my stuff. My shop was another thing that was surprising on that land, or on Rocktopia. I mean, I stopped doing the sales recording, but it's like $60,000 I've sold of virtual shit just out of that shop. I don't even know what it's been over the auction. It would be cool to get that history, but it's been millions of PED through auction that I've sold. But I think I covered most of why you would want to own land, what the basis of it is, what the benefits. And I did it live, just kind of, I don't want to like upload all this shit, spend hours uploading, because I'm on Starlink, so that takes forever. And it was getting long, but there's some interesting histories that I think people should know about, like the SEE, the Never Die lawsuit, or the Death of Fire lawsuits. The history of Never Die is incredibly fascinating. More people should do deep dives on that dude. And more players from this game. I mean, there really are legends of this game that people from WoW can't even compete. They can't even, it's a level, it's a totally different level. It's a totally different, and it's comical to me that there's like these gamers with like millions of views, and they're playing the like WoW and shit, like they get this fan base off playing a game that has no value. You're just wasting time. That's how I see it. I see all these people playing games that are wasting time. It's like, you're not even getting anything out of it. You can't even cash it out if you wanted to. You can't cash your skills out. What are you doing? It looks crazy to me after all these years. And I have a hard time playing games because of it, because it kind of ruined me in that way of like, if I'm going to do something, it's going to have value. And if it doesn't have value, it's kind of like, there's no purpose, So there it is. It's like 2 hours or something. And I hope it clears some of the stuff. And, I do want to say, I don't have my chats on. I used to stream quite a bit, and I want to say that I really missed those days. Just all the people that I've met, the fun times we had, the rock and the music and all the stuff. Some of the funnest stuff I've ever done, and I feel bad because I recoiled with COVID for a couple reasons. Because I was kind of an outspoken critic of COVID and the protocols, and then I got a lot of flack. And then two, I tried to explain this tax thing a few times, and people don't, they don't get it, and they, you're a liar, you're just trying to, so it's a frustrating on that. But I do have some regrets in the fact that I stopped the streaming, and I do want to thank the people for giving me some awesome years where we were able to stream and have a good time. And I wish that I had my excitement for the game still, because that's what I miss the most. And so I'm pivoting to my CNC machine more, and I'm doing more CNC content. And I kind of feel like I'm falling away from that group of people, but you guys are awesome. So I'll say that, and then yeah, I'll be doing more CNC related content. I'll post an update on whether or not I sell this land. Like I say, I've got 2 people that are interested. One guy wants to do like a trade now with a partial payment. I'm not really interested in that. I just kind of want to get it done. Another guy might be ready to buy in a week or 2, but these things take time on big ticket items. So I'm not in a rush. I don't even really need the money. It's just to me that since I'm not playing, somebody else could be using these benefits. Is really kind of where I'm at. I mean, if I was smart, I would be playing it and doing it every day still. But I'm not really smart, and I'm kind of bored with it. So it's time to sell. And there it is. Hope you guys have a good day. Once again, thanks for everybody on the Twitch and the game. Over the years, you guys are the best. And I'll be around here and there. Like I say, I still log in every day to do stuff, but I thought it was, I don't know, I thought it was important to kind of go over my perspective of this unique world we have. So I hope you have a good day. Thanks for watching, and we will talk to you later. I think. There we go, end stream.